is on. Here comes the throttle. Chevy breakers in. We have separation. Inboard now. Boards are on. We're coming forward with the side stick. I've got a blowout. Neighbor 3. Pitches out. I can't hold altitude. Correction. Elbow is off. Track flight is emergency. Flight call. I can't hold it. She's breaking up. She's breaking.
Hey guys, good evening. The Patriots mission accomplished today. Let me check and make sure our mics, everything's good. Okay, mission accomplished today. It was very hard to watch them knowing that we really needed them to lose. I barely missed a Patriots game in my lifetime. And I do remember a time back in the early 2000s, maybe around 2001, where the end of the season game, they called it the Stupor Bowl. And this was actually against, I think, the Colts back then. They were both trying to lose. They each had the worst record in the league. I'll be on in a moment with Grant Smith Ellis, who was at court for the hearing, Karen Reed this week. And we'll also be at the hearing tomorrow for Aidan Kearney. There's a lot of stuff going on this week. We'll try to avoid rumors as much as possible and stick to what is known. I want to just, before Grant arrives, I'm still waiting for him to pop in, want to talk about, I'm getting word that people on the prosecution side are, I guess, livid at me is the word it's used, because I'm not all in enough on the Karen is guilty side of things. I'm just going to cover every case, and like I've covered every subject in my life as fairly as I can. Doesn't mean I'm right, doesn't mean I'm wrong. I'm just trying to kind of cover everything fairly. I try to look at things from both sides. I'm always going to try to do that. I believe this is a slam dunk at this point, just based on the factual evidence that Karen Reed did this. In terms of whether there's malicious intent involved, I don't know. And we really aren't going to find out until the trial. But I'm also open to any new evidence that comes out, and I always will be. I don't have any skin in the game. I've never been to Canton. So I do believe that because of what's gone on here, innocent people have been done tremendous damage. And so I feel bad for them. I really do, particularly young guys like Colin. You're just getting started out in life and you're getting smeared by an attack. And I think it's unfair. But again, that's not going to affect my ability to apply independent, objective judgment analysis to things as they come through. And if people on any side aren't happy with that, you don't have to watch. I mean, I don't know what to say. I'm going to give you my analysis, and I'm going to always do the best I can to be as fair as I can. Again, I just want to say, Grant is here before I bring him in. One more thing I've said over and over about sources and receipts, and I'm sorry I have to keep repeating it, but you have a combination of things that come when you're investigating something, things that are based in documents, that's receipts, and that's stuff you can show. But things that are based on sources, you can't. And if you want us to do good investigative journalism, whether it's Aidan or the Boston Globe or the New York Times, there has to be sources, and some of those sources are going to be anonymous. And so really what it comes down to is I have to judge their credibility, and then you have to judge mine. And so I look at their track record, and then you do the same with me. And you decide what you believe. And not just my track record, but also telling you how I feel or how I approach this stuff. That someone that reaches out to me and it gives me information, I don't just assume that information is accurate, even if it fits a narrative that I've already bought into. No, every single piece, every source has to be questioned, and every single piece of information that comes my way. But what happens is I try to find out who this source is connected to, what, whether that gives me a good sense that they might have legitimate access to evidence or things like that. But also over time, if there are a lot of things that people tell me that I can't report, but I see them come true or not come true. And that's how that source, that's how they develop credibility with me. And then you have to trust me to make that decision. And that's just the way it is. And so you look at that over time. So let me bring in Grant. Hey, Grant, how are you, man?
Good, Kevin. How are you doing today?
Doing very good. I don't know if you watched the Patriots game today.
Yes, I watched Bill Belichick take what could be his final steps off the field at Gillette Stadium and felt like my childhood was dying, but as with all things, it must come to an
Yeah.
end.
I was mentioning before you got in here that I must have been 18 or maybe even younger. I don't know, but there was a game in the early 80s where the Patriots played the Colts and they both had the worst record in the league going into that last game, and they called it the Stupor Bowl. And it was kind of like this game, kind of a comedy of errors. And it's very hard to root for your team to lose. And this is the first game all year that I actually did do that, but it's hard.
Oh, I thought you were going to bring up that time we were playing the Dolphins in the 70s and they needed to shovel out the spot for the kick, and they came on that field, remember, with the weird sort of
Oh yeah,
snowplow and
yeah.
that's
Mark
kind of what.
something. I can't. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he ended up being famous, but that's how I think of the Patriots. There'll always be a Schaefer Stadium team playing. That's how
Yeah.
I'll always think of them. I can't come to terms with this sort of dynasty thing. It just never felt right. I don't know.
I went through all those years too, and I'm a huge Pats fan. I can remember having girlfriends back then where their dads would be like, "Why do you have to watch this team? They stink." And I'm like, they only play once a week. 16 games now. It's 17. I can give them my support, and you can turn it around in the NFL too, which is it's all one good draft and you're right back in it. So
Yeah, well, I won't belabor the point, but I will tell you I'm a Boston College football fan, so my life is just misery all the time, and maybe once every 50 years I get to enjoy a season. So, but anyway, let us get into what we are here to discuss.
We will, but since you mentioned BC, at the time that I was applying for colleges was the Doug Flutie years, and I wanted to go to BC. I got in, but I couldn't afford it. But that would have been Doug Flutie's junior year at Boston College, which would have been a really.
Oh, that's fun. So I'll give folks a fun little factoid here. My mom was a baton twirler at Boston College. She was actually the first member of her family to go to college. She was from down the lake in Newton and was a commuter at first to BC and then got her degree and then went to law school. And then she went from being a baton twirler during the Flutie years to a cheerleader for the Patriots. And the reason she stopped cheering for them is one year Joe Namath, I think with the Jets, threw a pass and it hit a Patriots cheerleader on the nose. I think it was at 85. So she stopped cheerleading right before they went to that Super Bowl in 86 and got ran over 56-10 by the refrigerator Perry and the Bears.
Oh, wow. I was in college at that time. So on the subject, before I get to your experience in court this week, I just want to also, if I want to talk about last week, the supper that was sent your way. Are you expecting anything tonight, or do you want to talk about that at all?
No, and I said this to the person who made that threat today. It doesn't mean anything to me. You will have to actually kill me to stop me from reporting. So unless you're going to take it to that level, I don't care and you're irrelevant to me. However, you shouldn't issue threats to people because the form of that kind of behavior undermines the integrity of not only the justice system, but also discourse in the public arena. So for that reason, I hope that person will be held accountable. But do I take it seriously? No.
Right. I was my family unfortunately turned away the Chinese food, and I was very disappointed because I was hoping for some kung pao. But don't anybody take that as me saying please order me some kung pao. So okay, so let's
can I make a point?
Yeah,
actually?
sure.
When you do that kind of, not you, but when people dox in that way, you're really just hurting the delivery people. Like I was a delivery driver for my first job. Well, actually I worked at Star Market first as a cart pusher. Then I worked as a delivery driver, and I don't know, I made like $24 a night, like in tips after like paying for gas. And you're stealing that little money that those people are making by sending out that food. Thankfully, some people out of the goodness of their heart will pay for it to make up for your heathenistic act of abuse, those people out there sending that kind of food. But don't do it. You're just hurting innocent people.
Right. And it's cowardly. Here we are, you see our names, you see our faces, you know who we are. And you're out there changing screen names and hiding these guys, hiding behind we don't know who they are and thinking they're going to threaten us. it's cowardly. I don't know how you look in the mirror and you see a coward. I don't know how somebody out there that does that doesn't see that in the mirror. But all right, let's get on to better things. Grant, take us through the experience of the hearing the other day, right from the beginning, getting there, the crowd that was out there. Let's get through that whole experience.
Sure. So that was Friday's hearing in the Karen Reed case. It was a motions hearing on 4 motions. In the case, we can go through them one by one because I think they're all relatively important. But the timeline of it that day was, it was cold. It was a bitter Friday morning. You could tell the storm was coming in. When I pulled up to Dedham, it was 15 or 17 degrees. Just getting out of the car, if I didn't have my gloves and layers on, it would have been rough. Nonetheless, when I pulled up and walked to the courthouse, there were 200 supporters there already, and this was maybe 7:45 in the morning. And it was, when I say it was cold, I mean it was actually painful. Now I don't have a lot of layers on my body, but it was painful to stand outside, and they were there. Rita was there with her sign, and I walked up the steps and I took a picture of the crowd, and then Rita said, "Did you get a picture of my sign?" And I said yes. And then so that's kind of how that part played out. There wasn't really a lot of hostility. The crowd was kind of anticipating Karen Reed's arrival. The court officers let us in about 8:15, 8:30. Went up to the courtroom, got set up. Kind of few weird series of events happened. So there was no still photographer because I think there was such a big crowd they couldn't get in. And so all the journalists got to take pictures, which doesn't happen very often in court. And then we were also able to live tweet. And so we're getting set up. The whole courtroom was packed. There were a lot of victims on the victim side. There was one man, I think it was a man, who was on the victim side that really shouldn't have been. He was kind of hassling them. And a court officer at one point kind of came up and was like, "You need to stop doing this. Like, this is inappropriate." So things that was the only real sort of Karen Reed arrival commotion. Karen Reed arrives, folks clapped in the audience, and then the hearing began. So that's kind of how it led up. There wasn't really a lot going on other than that clapping for Reed, which I wouldn't say is abnormal in a courtroom, but you don't see it every day.
Was this the first Karen Reed hearing you've been to?
I've watched some of the live streams, but I had never been to Norfolk Superior for a Karen Reed hearing, only a Turtle Boy hearing. So
I'd be interested to compare. We'd have to talk to someone else, but what was the feeling in the place? What was the mood? Because it looked different than the other hearings, but
attentive and frustrated. So people were very attentive to the details, and then people kept butting in on the Zoom. We couldn't hear in the courtroom what was being said on the Zoom. Later, I found out that people were like saying "F off" to the judge, which was not good. But that's what I would describe it as. There was no sort of anticipation or a lot of emotion. It was people wanted to learn what was going on, and they were frustrated when there were interruptions. That was the primary mood.
Yeah. And my understanding beforehand was that the O'Keefe, Albert, and McCabe's and everybody in that group was going to make a show of walking in together. Did that happen?
What's weird? I was in the courtroom the whole time, other than maybe a few minutes when I stepped out to go to the bathroom. So I can't be 100% on this, but I think I was there when almost everyone walked in. And nothing caught my attention until Reed walked in and folks clapped. So there were a lot of witnesses, a lot of people on the side of the witnesses and the victim in the courtroom, that sort of side of the courtroom. But I was not like, my attention wasn't drawn to their entrance. If anything, it felt like they felt sort of empowered, left alone, and that kind of thing. They just looked like they were there and they felt comfortable. Maybe that was the word. They felt comfortable.
And just one more question on that. Knowing that, when we talked last week, that this is a case that you haven't followed very closely, and you're still very objectively perched on the fence, as both sides are right in the middle. And that's a very good place for a journalist. So from that objective position, what do you think of a case that the defense theory seems to evolve a conspiracy theory, but where the victim's family is firmly on the side of the people accused of being part of the conspiracy? Does that leave an impression on you at all, or?
Yeah, so I think what leaves an impression on me about this case is just the PR apparatus about it. I think we talked last time about how I kind of study that kind of behavior, the way PR functions. And so when you're talking about, the witnesses, the caricatures of the witnesses and sort of these images that people build up in their minds of these people, especially among these sort of very tribal hive minds that have developed, I think that alienates first of all, the human involved in it. And I also think it alienates the ability for people to perceive truth and context. So getting back to all of this, what do I think about this conspiracy being framed? I don't have enough information about the overlapping concentric social circles or the web of connections that facilitated the emergence of this perverted Overton window into the public sphere. The Overton window is the range of acceptable discussions about a given topic or person or whatever in the public forum. So I don't know enough about how that came to be. I have some understanding of the form and the way it's being weaponized by the defense, but in some sense, barring what we will talk about later, I'm sure, which is obstruction and witness intimidation, people fight their cases in the court of public opinion. We talked about this last time. I don't like it. I don't think it's healthy, but that's how American jurisprudence has evolved. I don't think the court has now, and I think people who follow the courts will agree with me on this. I don't think the court has caught up to the rapidity of our digital age by any means.
Yeah.
And so really what we're seeing is the tension between the emergence of this rapid form of modern communication against an archaic and proudly archaic judicial system that is struggling to cope with what modern defendants are doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. All right. So what happened next in the hearing and some of the issues that they were discussing that day?
I think that it was the 4 motions that were up that day. The first motion was relatively easy to deal with because it had to do with voluntary submission of DNA evidence by 2 troopers who were represented by an attorney in court, and all of the parties. The Commonwealth didn't really oppose the request. The trooper's lawyer didn't really oppose the request. It was more about hammering out what the form would look like, not like a written form, but the form of how this collection would happen. Would it be done by an independent lab? Would it be done by an independent collector? And then there was a bit of a debate about whether there would be a preservation of the sample or the profile. And the defense ended up saying to the judge that the profile of the DNAs collected was more than enough, and that, they didn't need the actual sample. And that was the only point of contention, because the trooper's lawyer was saying, they're voluntarily giving up this sample. They don't want it to just be randomly accessed. So therefore, the profile being stored forever for appeal purposes is sufficient. And everyone kind of agreed on the basic premise. And then the judge said, okay, I have to think about whether this sample is going to be collected immediately and held in abeyance, which means just sort of held pending a ruling, or whether I'm going to order it right away. So just taking things as they happened in order, that was the first thing up for discussion. That's how it ended. The judge said, I will rule on this very quickly, but I have to take this under consideration. So that was the DNA evidence on the tail light for the troopers. So sorry, that was the first thing.
Yeah, and we'll get right to the second. And you can answer this maybe after you go through the other 3. But it was your general sense that there was a strategy here that was. I got the sense that that their main strategy was really just involved with trying to delay the trial, and the judge wasn't putting up with it. But we can come back to that after. So let's go to the second one. I think that you were.
Sure. So the second motion, and if you have the tweets, it may be helpful to keep me in order. But I think the next one up was the Rule 17 motion, and this was a little bit more complex because it had to do with a request for third-party witness documents pursuant to Massachusetts Rule of Criminal Procedure 17. Now that specific rule, and there's a lot of nuance to this argument that I think people were missing, so I'll try to tease it out, but I want to give my traditional disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. This is not legal advice, and you should get a lawyer if you have questions about the law. Okay, so what the real debate was in the context of this Rule 17 motion is, and this is going to take a little bit of time here, and I want folks to be patient because no one is expected to understand how the rules of evidence work in a criminal trial. It takes a very long time to learn. And so before we get to what Rule 17 is, let's think about what the rules of evidence are in this trial. Why are we even talking about the defense asking for this information from third-party witnesses? Okay, the answer is the defense wants to submit it or admit it at trial. Okay, you can only admit evidence at trial for a few purposes. Let me be clear. You can only seek evidence under this rule if it is going to be admissible at trial. You have a couple ways to argue that this evidence will be admissible in the face of a challenge. For example, if someone says this is hearsay, one of those arguments is that it is pulling back Rule 17. One of the arguments is that it is admissible because it's some kind of exception to hearsay, which is part of what the defense argued. And then there's another way to get around Rule 17, which is to argue that you're going to introduce the evidence for impeachment purposes. That's what came up next in the hearing and what I wanted to get to. So basically what the defense was arguing was they were trying to say, listen, we're not going on a fishing expedition here. We want documents and evidence and communication between, I think it was Michael and Elizabeth Proctor and Jennifer McCabe, and then also one of the Proctors and two of the Alberts. Am I right about that?
Yep.
Okay, so
and the judge did rule on this, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, we'll get to the rulings too, but I want to, because when you're in court, you don't know how the judge will rule later. So it's very interesting. You're kind of listening and thinking what could happen. So this argument was the longest part of the court hearing. I'm not belaboring it. The lawyers and the judge really got into the details of what are you seeking, defense, and is it going to be admissible at trial? And what the attorney, so it was Kevin Reddington for one of the witnesses and a guy named Andrew for the other witness. And both of the lawyers made very eloquent arguments and said, listen, this is not a discovery request, which is something completely different and way more broad. This is a request for admissible evidence, and the defense hasn't really identified in the context of certain communications anything other than what they may find. So that was the first argument. And then, of course, Alan Jackson, representing Reed, came back and said, well, you know, it may not necessarily be that we're just looking to introduce this for the truth of the matter. We may be looking to use it for impeachment purposes. And then he quoted a decision from SCOTUS, which I think was the Abel decision. And he read a quote from one of the SCOTUS justices. Might have been Ginsburg, I don't remember. But anyway, he read a quote from one of the SCOTUS justices basically saying impeachment is a very broad scope for introducing evidence, much broader than if you were introducing it for, you know, the truth or for like that reason. And for that reason, Jackson was saying, listen, we need some latitude here, Your Honor. We need to be able to get some of these communications because we want to use them for impeachment. So that's really where that argument boiled down to. And I think, as you mentioned, the judge eventually ruled, but the lawyers on both sides really knew the details of that. And you could tell that, and they had a lot of respect for each other's knowledge of the rules. And it was a very refined argument.
Yeah. You know, that whole aspect of the case, again, is a fishing expedition. You're trying to get to whether or not there was some, they're trying to find if there was some pre-existing connection between the Proctors and lead investigator Michael Proctor and the families, the Alberts or the McCabes. And it's clearly a fishing expedition. I can say that I've seen the messaging, and Elizabeth Proctor, Michael's wife, the lead investigator, Michael Proctor's wife, didn't know Jen McCabe until the day. Sorry, I got to stay on the constant trolling, trying to give out our addresses. These can only be described as cowards. But anyways, so they were trying to, I'm sorry, I got distracted, but Elizabeth had communicated with Jen. They met the day before when they went to the DA's office to complain about the harassment that they all been receiving. And that's when they met. And so they ended up ended up on the same, sorry, I'm still reading the messages. Sorry about that, Grant. Ended up communicating, commiserating, and becoming friends. Probably not good optics there for them to get together, but this is what they're fishing for. I just want to respond to Semolina here. She says that you say you've seen a lot of messages, Kevin, and can't back it up. Again, I've addressed this, Semolina. If you want to go back and scroll back to the beginning, there are sources, and when you have sources, you have to trust you have to trust my ability to evaluate their credibility, and either you do or you don't over time. Okay, the things that I've reported have all come true over time. The one thing that was this summer, I'm not going to go into it. We ended up having to retract it pretty much the next day, and have come clean with it many times since. If something turns out to be false information or even not fully substantiated, I'll correct it right away, and that's always the way I'm going to do it. But I'm sorry, sorry about the distraction.
So I'll say two things.
Yeah.
I'll say two things about that.
Yeah.
Firstly, I thought the most telling. No, let me reverse this order. One, I find Semolina very endearing, but on Twitter I compared them to a banjo and a washing machine, and I really mean that. I mean, you're endearing. I enjoy you. I find you interesting. I like talking to you, but you are like a banjo and a washing machine, and I can't keep track of like some of the things you say sometimes. The second thing, the situation with the witnesses, I thought a very telling quote relayed in court was somebody has a sister who has a wife who has a friend who has a brother who has a friend who has a sister that links these witnesses. And when that got read out, that kind of made me step back and say, okay, wait, are there 5 degrees of attenuated relationships that led to them being in this wedding party? And so that's kind of what as an observer of all this, I was kind of like, and let me say one other thing. So sometimes I go to look at some of the evidence in this case, and I don't mean to take us on a tangent, but let's say, for example, the Canton Library video. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Someone presents the fact that this Canton Library video doesn't exist as a big deal. And then I look and I'm like, oh, there's phone data that shows she didn't drive by the library, and so I feel like I'm constantly running into that in this case. I have to take nothing at face value. I don't trust. I mean, there are some of you who earn trust because you're right over time and you're willing to step forward and publish retractions when you're wrong, which I have done in the past as well, multiple times when necessary. But there are some of you who I feel like I'm constantly having to say, before I even read what you're writing, what is this person's bias and how are they trying to manipulate me before I can even think about trying to decipher what you're presenting. And I don't like that. I wish people would just be forthcoming.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's fact, I've been getting some word back that some people on the prosecution side are unhappy with me because they feel I have not covered strongly enough the idea that the evidence points to Karen's guilt. And honestly, what I've explained is that I covered it objectively. And the difference is, look at somebody like Olivia who's very articulate and came across as a nice person when I've heard her. I gotta delete. So I'm putting your address up again. So came across.
Stop it, Steve. Be nice. Go ahead.
Who knows if it's Cody, but there's a few of them. But it's just unfortunately they're able to keep logging in under different names. Anyways, what I was trying to explain to somebody, the problem would say, for instance, with Olivia, is that because she doesn't ever once question any part of the conspiracy theory or even look at any of the evidence, for instance, the GPS data that doesn't fit the conspiracy theory, it becomes clear that she's an advocate, that she's just an advocate for one side. I'm not going to say that she's a paid advocate. I have no idea who she is or whether she's paid or not. But she comes across as an advocate, not someone who's trying to just cover it journalistically or as an interest in the truth. And to me, it's more effective if you are objective and try to be objective and sometimes question certain things on both sides of the cases, which is what I've done. And it took me a long time to get access to enough of the evidence where I could say, okay, there's no conspiracy here. All right, Karen did this. But that doesn't mean I'm still not looking at all of the evidence, and questioning things. So I think it's more effective. So to me, what Olivia is doing is no longer effective because it comes across as too one-sided. I don't know. Does that make sense, Grant?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any firm opinions about all of that yet. I have read a lot of that person's writing, and I've listened to some of their commentary. Very erudite. Not a lawyer, though. I pushed them. At least they wouldn't admit to it. I pushed that person very hard one time on whether they were a lawyer, because they were offering a lot of commentary that was right. It was very, as I said, erudite and learned in a way that reflected an intimate knowledge of criminal and civil procedure that you wouldn't learn even by studying it. You would learn it by observing the process like firsthand for a long time.
Right.
So,
right. Or at least firsthand in this case.
No, I wouldn't. No, I don't think anyone could pick up, and I'm not saying, this is just my opinion. It would be very hard to pick up a nuanced and refined understanding of the legal process in the context of any case, because it is so contextual, based on precedent and unspoken sort of rules of behavior and multi-state jurisdictional analyses and like controlling federal principles. There's just so much overlapping and intermeshed nuance to it all, that to comment so there's a level of, I think it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect. There's a level of confidence and bravado that you can only have when you're wrong. And then there's a level of accuracy that you can only have when you're learned. And weaponizing the latter is far more dangerous than the former. And in fact, it is the people who are subversive with their knowledge that take advantage of the former that I get concerned about, which, if you follow my commentary on this case, I told people I am very interested in the PR aspect of this. And if you push me, it's not going to direct me away from it. It's going to narrow me in on what you're doing, because I'm very good at hermeneutically reconstructing it. So.
I just want to address Semolina too, which we know her from Twitter. I don't know who she really is, but Semolina, you're welcome to come on sometime. Anytime, even if you want to come on later, if you want to present. See, I do believe that intelligent debate from different sides or different angles is the best way to get closer to the truth. Either one side can convince the other, or even if not, you expose different parts of the case. And I think it's very effective. So you're welcome to come on anytime. Just let me know. You have my email. I think you have my contacts on Twitter or anything else. So we'd love to have you.
But yeah, let me get to the bottom line on the question of, Elizabeth David Drombowski and this Olivia person and this volunteer group that Selmalina's in. You should really disclose that, Selmalina, your volunteer Zoom meetings, right, that you have with those people from that email chain that I got. You already admitted to it, and you admitted to talking to Elizabeth prior to that email going out on, what was it, November the 15th, I think it was. The perils of seeing everything like just in my brain. I get stuff like close to right. But anyway, Selmalina, you should really disclose that. Like, what are you all doing in those Zoom meetings? Is anyone paid? I know you're not paid or remunerated, but that's what I don't like about all this. It's so much cloak and dagger, and it's not for the defense. The reason why I superimpose this duty of disclosure is the defense is putting things out there into the public, and the defense is really the only people who can put that kind of material out there leading up to trial. The prosecution speaks through its case in chief during trial. So if you're going to be speaking pre-trial and you have any ties to the defense, volunteer or otherwise, you have to disclose it, because you're playing on an unfair playing field and you're beating up on people, the other side, who cannot talk. That's kind of how I feel about that. And one more thing. Yeah. I asked Mr. Yannetti and Mr. Jackson, yelling though it may have been, who is Elizabeth David Drombowski? First of all, they wouldn't answer. This is apparently like a lawyer who does like a strange pay structure for her work, where she'll take on a client through like a fund or like a private donor, and then bill at a lower rate than normal for the public interest. I asked them who she was. They wouldn't answer. And then I asked about the federal investigation, which is a good segue, and whether Mr. Yannetti referred it its beginnings via Rachel Rollins, because the next thing up in the court hearing was the motion involving the USAGs. And that's when things kind of went, well, there were two more motions, but the next one was about the USAG. And that's when things became very telling, but you really had to know the court process to understand why that quick interaction was so telling. So we can talk about that next.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You get into a journalist in the era of that existed before social media. If you're a journalist covering the case, you know who the journalist is. Now we have this anonymity that goes on in social media. I'm kind of torn about it. Even just say somebody like Olivia, who wants desperately to keep her anonymity. I understand it, especially looking at the threats and stuff that goes on and the attempt to smear people and put lies up on stuff like that. Who wants that in their life? But at the same time, if you're out there, if you're somehow connected to the defense or to one side or the other, if you're a paid advocate, I do think that kind of probably should be exposed. I don't know. I know it's an interesting debate anyways.
Well, as I said, I think there's a duty to disclose. I don't think it's very healthy. And where my final thoughts on that is that inevitably, the more things will come out. 10 people can't keep a secret unless 9 of them are dead. I totally butchered that phrase. But the point is, that's it. Absent compartmentalization and a level of let me just rephrase this. Absent compartmentalization, which means breaking up the project into different parts in a way that no one knows what they're doing. Think like Oak Ridge in Tennessee during the Manhattan Project. People would just go in and push buttons on a machine. They had no idea what they were doing. Absent that and a very high level of organization, which I think the defense has a lot of money, but I don't necessarily know if they're like government level, like secret ops projects level. I don't sense that. I sense just some people who are kind of getting together through like social media and stuff like that. So my point is, absent compartmentalization and that level of skill, you are not going to keep anything a secret. I don't care who you are, especially something like this. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. We're going to find out more about that in time. I know it. I can just sense it.
I do know that before Natalie, who had kind of taken over Karen's social media presence and media communication strategies and did that for free as a friend. But before her, Karen was paying somebody $3,000 a month, was Boston based. I don't know the name of the person, but it's not that important. Let's get to, I really want to get to, you mentioned, I did see your great question about Rachel Rollins as you were following these guys up. But before we get to that, let's finish up everything that happened inside the court that was of interest. There was, Karen seemed to lose her cool a little bit at one point there. I'm not sure I think she was talking to Lally. I hope she wasn't talking to the judge when she said, fuck you or something like that. But take us through the rest of what you saw there. Bring us into the courtroom again,
Oh, sure. So, yeah, we were going through the proceedings. We got through 2 motions and we were getting up to the third. As to Reed mouthing something to the judge, it may have, or Lally, it may have, I don't think it was to the judge. It may have been to Lally at the very end. I only saw the video. I didn't see it happen and really hear it, so I don't know if it was audible. But what I will say is that third motion, so it was very, very interesting because, pardon me, I burp sometimes. I have trouble like swallowing air, right? Anyway, we won't get into it. But anyway, so we're in court and the third motion comes up, and I had been there that day because I'm very intrigued by this whole, not only the whole potential of a federal investigation occurring, but also how it started, whether the OIG, which is a federal level sort of oversight agency, is itself looking into all of this. All of that to me was fascinating. So I was very interested in going to the hearing on Friday and learning about this motion from the defense, which was to, I think it was, what was it? Unredact, or so it was a motion to make public basically the letters between Michael Morrissey's office, the Norfolk County DA, and the US AG's office, which is currently run. Oh, I can't believe I don't remember his name. Joshua Levy, I think, is the current US AG. Oh, nice. I got it.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So it was letters between them. And you have to remember, Joshua Levy only came into the office, I believe, when Rachel Rollins left due to the situations that came up, I believe, between her and Ricardo Arroyo.
Yeah.
But I didn't.
I got a lot on this. We're going to go over this when we get to the end. I got a lot of stuff on the feds that I want to run by you. But
Yep.
so we'll get to that when we get to that question. Yeah, good.
Yeah. So the motion itself, though, this is all related to the motion, because what the defense was saying was we want these communications specifically between the Norfolk County DA's office and the USAG's office. Now, I don't know if it was, I should have read the motion. It was probably the USAG's office, because I doubt they would have said between the USAG, like now, just this current USAG. So I'm interested how many of those communications there are when they started, when they went back. This is my interest in this third motion. And immediately, the judge looks at the defense attorney, all three of them. It was Yannetti, Jackson, and a woman named Elizabeth Little, I think, sitting with the defense. And the judge immediately looks at them and was like, you didn't serve the United States Attorney General's office for the District of Massachusetts. And the attorney was like, there was no response. And then immediately I tuned in, because I was like, oh, something's going on here. And so the judge then said back, the USAG's office has a right to be heard in this case. That was the verbatim quote from the judge. Then the attorney was like, oh, okay, you're right, Your Honor. And basically what that means, it was very quick. It was not a debate. The lawyer knew he didn't do it right. And the quickly was just like, oh, okay, you're right. So, but what had happened was, if you want to understand this from a legal perspective, caveat, disclaimer, not a lawyer, not your lawyer, not legal advice. What was happening was, when you serve, so when you file a motion in court, say, let's just make a hypothetical case between me, Grant, and the Cannabis Control Commission, because they banned me from sending them press inquiries because I was covering alleged corruption within the agency, and that led to multiple state investigations. Then they really don't like me as a result. Hypothetically, right? So say I want to sue the Cannabis Control Commission. Well, they're an agency of state government. So if I want to go file a 211(3) petition to the single justice of the SJC, hypothetically, that you could read under the case that I'm sure is accessible on the docket, then what I would have to do is go down to downtown Boston and in person submit a motion to the court and a memorandum of law. And I would have to submit a certificate of service at the end, where I would have to attest that I sent by certified mail or email not only the Cannabis Control Commission a copy of my moving papers and my memorandum of law, but also that I sent it to the Attorney General of Massachusetts, because that the Attorney General has a right to intervene in any lawsuit against the state agency. Now, if you as a pro se plaintiff go down to the clerk's office, and I can tell you this because it happened to me, the clerk will look at you and say, wow, you filed a certificate of service that correctly included the Attorney General? That is very surprising, because most people don't do it. So what would the normal procedure be? The clerk would have said to me, Grant, you need to go print this again. You need to email it to the Attorney General and then say in their certificate of service X, Y, and Z. That's the proper form. It's not even it's just a court rules thing. You got to do it. So here's where I'm getting to. An attorney is not going to have a clerk rifling through their filings being like, did you do your certificate of service right? Because an attorney is an officer of the court and has been doing this forever. So this motion got submitted without being properly served to the feds. I'm sure somebody picked up on it. And that's
do you think that was, do you really think that was an oversight, or was it really just intentional part of it?
No, it had to be, because it's this very nuanced clause in the service rules. The USAG doesn't have to show up. The USAG has no obligation to do anything, but there's a very nuanced clause that says that if the involved party has a right to be heard, you have to serve them. It's a very technical thing, and it's not something you would necessarily be thinking of when you're filing a complex motion about the federal government. But needless to say, it immediately resulted in the judge saying, this basically shouldn't have been docketed, reserve it correctly, and we'll take it up on, what is it, the 18th at the next hearing, I think it is.
Right. Okay. So should we move to when you're outside of the court, or is there the fourth part of this you want to still cover?
What was the fourth? There was a fourth motion. I was just thinking, it was about the Verizon and the Google records. So that part, somebody, I think Brian, the real estate attorney, I'm sorry, I know what your last name is. It's just escaping me right now. So someone was asking me about this. And what happened was there was a fourth motion about, I think it was a December 15th, 2020
Not sure if we're frozen here. Give it a second, guys. Grant, can you hear me? All right, we seem to be frozen for the moment.
Am I back?
You're back now. Yep.
Okay, so was I? Oh, sorry, it's my internet. Was I right in the middle of the production thing?
Yeah. So the fourth motion regarding the Verizon, I think it was the.
Oh, right. So there was a December 15, 2023 production deadline. Apparently it had not been sent in or something. And the defense counsel, who forgot to stand up, that was Attorney Little. She forgot to stand up, and immediately the judge was like, you forgot to stand up. We stand in Massachusetts. So the lawyer stood up. That was a tense moment, but it passed quickly. And then the lawyer said, we didn't get our production. But here's the thing that's important for people to understand. This was not a subpoena to the government for records in the government's control. That is something completely different. This was a third-party subpoena to a records holder, in this case, Google and Verizon, I think it was. And so in that case, the way that the judge quickly got to this point and said, the way that you do this, counsel, is you defense counsel have to call the records holder and say to the records holder, you were supposed to do this by December 15th. There's a court order. Do it. So the counsel said, okay, Your Honor, starts taking notes. Then the counsel said, this was a counsel Little, Your Honor, or can I ask the court clerk, Your Honor, if there anything that has been sent over? And this is where the nuance people may have missed. Then the clerk said, Your Honor, sidebar, please. So from my understanding of how custodians of records function and these big companies do things, I think there could be a few different things that happen there, because the sidebar no one could hear. If you've never been to court, what they do is it's very smart. They use a white noise device that projects forward from the bench. So if you're sitting there and they're at sidebar, I was in the jury box. I was 20 feet, 15 feet from that conversation. And all I just heard was this very gentle kind of white static. I couldn't hear them talking. So, okay. So, but to get to the point, the sidebar was very much, it seemed to me like it could have been a few things. One, because it did go on for a while, it seemed like there was some tension, but the tension didn't seem like it was insurmountable. So here's what I think it could be. I think it could be that some of the records have been produced so far. And what the clerk was going to say to the judge was okay, somebody got back to us, one of the two parties, but they need to submit it. We need all the records. It could also have been that one party said, hey, we submitted some documents to you, but we need more time to submit. You know what I mean? The other thing is, and I have no indication that this has happened. I'm just telling folks what I think could have happened. It's possible that Google, was it Google and Verizon?
Yes.
Have they been compliant with other subpoenas in the case? Is this the first one?
As far as I know,
it's the first one.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is. I'm not sure, but I think this was related to that particular sidebar, to the Google. I forget what it's called, but it would involve whether or not a camera was set up at 34 Fairview. Is that correct? Is that what you're hearing? Or?
I didn't actually probe into what the Google data was, but what's important and relevant for our purposes, just remember, every company's different. So you can serve a subpoena on Apple. They may have a great legal department and get that stuff back to you a week later, in great form, whatever. You may serve another big company who just doesn't have a great process, and it takes a while. You may serve another company who's I'm not doing this. I'm not giving you these records. My clients have a right to privacy. I can't tell you whether that happened, but I'm just explaining whatever that sidebar was. It was about the production, and it ended not really in a hostile way, but it more ended with the attorneys coming back, and then very quickly the attorney moved on to, okay, Your Honor, I understand. Moving on, can I submit the grand jury minutes confidentially to the court? So that's kind of how it played out. So you really had to know what was happening because of how weird it was, but the vibe was something about the production was off from Google and Verizon.
And so this was my understanding was that Karen was disappointed to find out that at that time that there was no cameras was set up at 34 Fairview, because they owned a camera that they reported that they hadn't taken out of the box and set up or ever gone through that process. I could be wrong. I really don't know. That's just what I'd heard.
Oh, so that now that you mention it, now that I think back, I think when Karen got animated, and I don't think it was when she did the alleged cuss, although I can't read lips, so I don't even know what she said. But when she got, I saw a clip played back later that when she got animated, it was about that issue. It was when the clerk said, or when someone said, "Oh, we might not have all the records from the December 15th, 2023 production." So that I don't know how to interpret that. Like, I don't know. Was she upset because she wants to like expedite this? Was she upset because she really wants something in there? Was she just acting? It doesn't seem like she was acting, because you don't ever, as a defendant, in my opinion, want to act like anyway. You just want to be stoic. You don't want to give, even without jurors there, you just want to be the picture of calm. And she reacted to that non-production for the Google and Verizon data. So that was interesting. And it could just be she was saying, hey, the court said December 15th, and that means December 15th. Why didn't they do it? That could have been it,
Right. I mean, she's a very educated, very intelligent person. So she's not someone that's just sitting back and letting her fate rest in the hands of her defense attorney. She's involved in every aspect of this strategy. And I can definitely, including social media and many, many other ways that I have seen the evidence of this, and going back for a long way. So nothing wrong with that. She's very involved.
Well, now that you mention it, so to walk out of the court, we had to kind of wait for people to leave the courtroom because the court ended pretty quickly after that exchange. That was the fourth motion. And they kind of had us leave in groups and stuff. And as we were coming out of the court, we had to then stand there like in this like large crowd waiting for Reed and her attorneys to come out. And as I'm standing there at the base of the stairs, there's like a bunch of camera people trying to get in front of me and people just moving all around. It was chaos. But eventually things calmed down and Reed walked out, and we're standing there waiting for her to walk down. And Yannetti walks by, doesn't say anything, and then Reed walks by, and it's a very narrow corridor, and she kind of looks at my camera, but there's a lot of cameras around her, and she didn't really say anything. But it was the first time she was within, I don't know, 1 or 2 feet of me, and I was trying to look at her face to see if she recognized me, to determine whether she had been watching coverage of the case very closely. But it was like 2 seconds, maybe less, and I couldn't pick up on it. But I was reading her. I was trying to pick up on whether or not she recognized me.
So then you followed them out the courthouse, and you got some questions to Jackson and Yannetti. It was kind of interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts on. Now, in the past, they typically have stood on the steps and had a press conference. This time, they didn't do that. Do you have any thoughts because of the weather being cold, or was there some other reason you think?
No. Okay. So, again, just my opinion. I did not get the sense that they didn't have a press conference because the weather was cold. I got the sense it was a tactical decision. They knew from the moment they walked out that door, they were not giving a press conference. Right. When that decision was made, I don't know. I didn't sit around and listen to them strategizing. I heard Yannetti got caught on a hot mic saying something at the end of the hearing.
Oh, yes. Circus.
Like it's the most wildest thing he's ever seen. But no, I don't know when that decision was made, but I got the sense that it was a decision that was made and that they were not going to have a press conference. Fine. That's not, if anything, that's probably the norm for criminal defendants to not have press conferences during the middle of your pretrial proceedings.
Right.
So,
and that mission's already been accomplished. They wanted to create. Now, I don't know. Yannetti was probably talking about a very different kind of circus. Maybe it seemed to me like maybe a criticism of the judge, but the circus that we're thinking about outside the courthouse, that's what they wanted. They've worked hard to create that, and mission accomplished. So there's no reason to hold any more press conferences out there. So.
Oh, I don't know about that. We should talk about Tom's confrontation video later. But let's. I got the sense that they knew questions were coming. That was that was the more vibe I got. Like they knew they were going to get at. Like remember, Turtle Boy had just gotten arrested. This was their first time on the courthouse steps since that. So I think they knew if they like stood up there and were being sanctimonious and saying, "Oh, DA Morrissey this," and et cetera, the first question was going to be, Can you talk a little bit about Mr. Kearney's bond revocation for domestic violence? And then they would have no commented it. Then, you know, maybe a softball or two, but then they immediately would have got hit with Mr. Yannetti. Can you please explain your relationship to Rachel Rollins by way of you being on our transition team for Suffolk County District Attorney? And in turn, can you please explain whether you've referred the criminal indictment against Mr. Morrissey by way of Rachel Rollins or someone in her office at that time? And then they probably knew they were going to get a question about the PR operation, and Mr. Jackson did indeed get a question about Elizabeth David Drumbowski, if she is indeed involved with said operation. And I think there would have been other questions as well. And they knew walking down those stairs that at least in my opinion, I'm interpreting because I was there, what I sensed about what led to their decision making, because I can't confirm any of this. But what I got the sense was that on balance, and this is what my thinking would have been if I were on their side, quote unquote, again, their side, I would have said, if I go out there, on balance, am I going to get asked more softballs or more difficult questions? If the answer is more difficult questions, you don't do it. And that's probably why they didn't do it.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the feds, because I have some interesting things that I want to tell you and get your opinion on it. Okay. I know you're not a lawyer, as no need for the disclaimer, but you know a lot about the law. So this is really interesting stuff. So Karen apparently, and I read this message, was talking about the fact that the FBI was investigating this case all the way back in August of 2022.
Who was the USAG in August of 2022, Kevin?
Rachel Rollins. And,
that's interesting, isn't it?
And, yeah, and I did a story on Rachel Rollins being connected to this case back in May. I did a whole video on it. It was just speculation at the time, but you know, this goes way beyond Rollins though, because Karen also was telling people again, and I've seen the messages, that Josh Levi, who was then the first U.S. attorney, which is right underneath Rachel Rollins, is now the acting U.S. attorney.
Wait. Hold on. Joshua Levy, the current USAG, was in the USAG's office potentially when this probe started under Rachel Rollins?
I believe so.
Oh, God help us all.
He was serving as what's called the first attorney, first U.S. attorney.
I'm familiar with how it works.
Yeah. So right underneath. And now this guy, Josh, is an elite lawyer. He's only recently joined the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was a partner for about 18 years before that for Ropes and Gray, one of the top law firms in the country. And they handle a lot of high-priced clients, big-time cases and big-time clients. Not sure why you typically leave that kind of a position to go work for the U.S. Attorney, other than some kind of political ambition, like maybe to be a future attorney general for at the cabinet level or something like that. I'm not really sure, or maybe it's just to develop more connections that they cycle these guys through the firms. It's something like that. But in any case, he graduated.
Ever hung out with feds before, Kevin?
Not those kind of feds, but he graduated magna cum laude at Georgetown and undergraduate from Brown. So this is a very elite guy. And I don't know anything about him personally, but he's obviously a very intelligent guy. And so he told Karen that he was going to, quote, make an exception and get involved with prosecuting this case himself. And I can confirm to you that he did question witnesses in the federal grand jury. And that's all I can say about it. But it's very unusual, A, that he did that, and B, that he's communicating that. Now, I don't know if this communication, it seems like it was directly to Karen, but it may not have been. It may have been, for instance, he's friends with Yannetti, and that communication, and Yannetti was telling Karen this. I don't know, but it's extremely unusual stuff. What do you think about that?
What do I think about that? I think I'm not the U.S. Attorney General's Office of the Inspector General, and I think if I were a member of Congress and I heard that, I would immediately convene an oversight hearing and demand that the OIG deliver me a report about whatever the hell it is you just explained to me, because I don't even know how to take in what you just said to me. That is
it's weird, wild stuff, isn't it?
It's not just weird and wild. It is extremely egregious. extremely egregious, and it's the type of thing that it's not good.
Yeah, I'm definitely of the opinion that someone needs to really take a close look into what the feds have been up to in this case. And even just going back to, if it's true, as Karen said, that the FBI got involved in August of 2022. Now you got to remember, that is the time, much of the basis for the conspiracy theory here is the data that was produced by Rich Green, the forensic data expert hired by the defense, based on their copies of John's phone and Jen's phone back in March of this past year. So all of that information, the hypothetical 227 searches for how long to die in the cold, and deletions, and health app data supposedly showing John going up and down stairs, all of that was not around in August of 2022. So what was the predicate for the FBI opening an investigation or getting involved in this here?
Tell me more about Rachel Rollins' relationship or animosity towards Michael Morrissey.
Okay, I mean, the only thing I was able to find online is that Rachel Rollins, when she first, or very soon after she took office as the Suffolk DA, she is very liberal, and she was concerned about young Black men that were in jail for lengthy prison sentences for murder, but who were under 21 when they committed the crime. So she wanted to have guys that are 18, 19 not be treated as adults. And she wanted to have basically an evidentiary hearing as to whether I think the adult male brain was fully formed and therefore should be treated as an adult. And because of the danger of this, of potentially getting, and I can understand to some degree her point on this, but you're also talking about sending dangerous people back into the community. And there were, I think, 6 DAs who opposed this, and most prominent among them was Michael Morrissey. And Rachel Rollins is clearly the kind of person that does not forget a slight. And interestingly, in one of the articles I found, it seemed to be Yannetti seemed to be sticking up for Rachel Rollins and backing her in this particular.
Is there any connection between Morrissey and Joe Kennedy?
All right. What I was able to find was an article in Boston Magazine that interviewed, among other people, Aidan Kearney. And there was a Black activist who I wouldn't consider a rival to Rollins, because Rachel Rollins has a law degree. This person was an uneducated Black activist who became prominent during the Black Lives Matter movement. She started becoming politically kind of a darling of the Boston Globe and stuff like that for a while, and started raising a lot of money. And she began appearing with Joseph Kennedy III, who was running against Ed Markey. Now, Ed Markey is a liberal in good standing for many, many years as a politician in Massachusetts. The only reason they were running Joseph Kennedy III is because if he succeeded in taking JFK's old seat, they were going to run him right now. He'd be right now running in the primaries against Biden. And I guarantee the Biden people were well aware of it and wanted to squash that. So to quote Aidan Kearney, Rachel Rollins weaponized him, is the way he described it. She weaponized him and started giving him information about campaign events and who knows
about Rayla Campbell, right?
This was about Monica Cannon Grant.
No, right, but wasn't Rayla? So do you know what I'm talking about, though? I'm sure some people listening know what I'm talking about. Rayla Campbell ran a Republican campaign for.
I do remember her. Yes.
Was it for Senate? It wasn't for Senate. It must have been for Rep. Was it for Rep? It was against Joe. Yeah. It was involving Joe Kennedy, wasn't it? There was a situation where it might have been someone else, where Rayla Campbell was playing spoiler in a race. And I believe Rachel Rollins was sending information to Turtle Boy about
Boston City Council. I know that was Boston City Council that she was running for. Yeah.
So there was something going on where Rachel Rollins was connected to Rayla Campbell, and then Turtle Boy was connected to Rayla Campbell, and that had to do with Monica Cannon Grant as well. And then there was something. So I think where this is all driving to is that what you said there, something really struck a chord with me, which was that there was a national political incentive to keep Joe Kennedy out of that seat. So that could build up a lot of animosity and enemies among people. But really what I'm interested in more so than anything else, and trust me, there are ways to find this out, especially the OIG on the federal level.
Hey, Grant, can you do me a favor? I apologize, but apparently there's something going on. I have to step away for the mic a moment as a safety issue. Can you just hold on to the show for a minute? And
and I'll talk.
I'll be right back. I promise. I can actually still hear you too. But I have to go check and see if Cody's at the door.
Oh, goodness. I don't know what that means, but what I'm going to say is don't do that to people, please. It's inappropriate. And we're taught, if you can't let me take a second to say this. If you can't realize that what we're talking about here are very high level political discussions, and if you're involved in this and you're playing inappropriate games, I don't really know how to explain it to you other than to say this is not, oh goodness, a traditional sort of discussion of a situation like a public policy situation. You're not talking about a regulatory agency or something. You're talking about the highest levels of the state and maybe federal government. Definitely the highest federal levels of the federal government on the local level, the region here. So I think what you're doing without maybe realizing it, which is why I call it short-sighted and myopic, is exposing yourself to a degree of scrutiny that no human being would want. Like I just can't explain to you how bad it is to be under the scrutiny or microscope of some of the political actors involved in this, especially the enforcement branch. Like you're talking about federal, like law enforcement. You're talking about the highest levels of state law enforcement. It's not worth it. You should respect the solemnity of this process. You should participate, but you should respect it because if anything, I think the past few weeks have shown the system knows how to insulate itself. It does it insulate itself. It does it well if you threaten its integrity, and the results are not pleasant.
So apparently what it was somebody, this jackass Steve Cody or somebody else, ordered Domino's pizza, sent it to my house, and did not pay for it. So you're basically fucking with this poor delivery guy, and in the middle of a winter storm where it's still snowing out. I mean, this is the I try to. It's not the case that everybody who has different opinions on this case is part of the mob, but there are mob tactics here, and they are connected to this turtle riding group. They have long been connected to it, and if you contribute to turtle ride as a turtle rider, you're contributing to those tactics. He's encouraged it, he's facilitated it, and so we'll just move on. But anyways,
let me weigh in on that because I think it's important to remember that we're in the heat of the moment, but there have been people on the Turtle Boy side, the Karen Reed side, on both sides who have stepped up and said, don't do this kind of stuff. Don't use slurs, just debate your points on merit. And I think we should not, I think part of why tribalism or hive minds occur is because in the heat of very intense moments when people should not be targeted in that way, especially when it has an impact on some innocent delivery driver, it's very easy to paint with broad brushes. And I would forgive anyone for feeling like, these people are on one side or the other enabling it. But there are people, I think, who listening to this will feel duty bound to say, yes, of course, that's over the line. We would never tolerate or sanction that. Let me say something else. I don't know if you were able to pay or not, but I think it would be great if and I can contribute a few dollars. I think it'd be great if we could find a way to make sure that man gets paid for that pizza so it doesn't come out of like the $40 he was going to make tonight in the snow. So anyway,
I turned him away. I turned him away. It's just, unfortunately, that's just how I'm going to have to do it because otherwise they'll just keep doing it. And so obviously it becomes very expensive. If there was a way I could have bought it and shared it with everybody in chat, that would be awesome. But that's going to be the internet of the future.
Steve, you
So
can
let's
always
get,
call back. Steve, if you are thinking about what Jesus will do to you when you're at the pearly gates, the gorilla position, as Bobby Heenan once called it, if you're thinking about that, Steve, you have to wonder, right? In the moment you're listening to this right now, you have a choice. You could call that pizza place and say, here's my credit card number. Just give the guy a $5 tip. I'll pay for the damn pizza. And then you'd kind of be absolved, don't you think? You should consider that, Steve, for Jesus.
I actually was thinking that maybe he had paid for it, and I would have accepted if he had paid for it and given him a tip, but all right. Anyways,
Back to the outside of the hearing, because maybe that was Steve's point. So we were talking. Well, what is it? Had we moved on to the details of the case? Had we wrapped up with the press conferences? Were we analyzing why the defense was concerned about having the press conference? Was that right where we were at?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff. Anything.
Oh no, we were talking about the Fed stuff. Please, we got to get
the
back to
Fed,
that.
yeah, that's a big thing. A lot of people are discussing. Obviously these guys know each other. Yannetti worked in the Suffolk DA's office. So did Bradel, Turtle Boy's lawyer.
Well, obviously Yannetti,
Yannetti, Rachel Rollins. So these guys all know each other. All right, but is that enough? Is Yannetti able to get a federal investigation launched? No, I mean,
so
there has to
that's
be some kind of predicate.
no,
but,
that's what I wanted to say. I've watched, I don't know why I do this to myself, but I'm very interested in reading OIG reports on the federal level. And then I listen to the congressional testimony, like not just the Mueller report. And there's like other OIGs that have done investigations that I followed closely. And what you'll find, especially into the Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and Carter Page thing, whoever was the OIG that did that inspection, I learned so much about the federal process from that OIG investigation, because you get some
Horowitz. His name was Horowitz.
Yes, that was it. Was he? Yes. So the reason I tell you about this is, guess what I know exists? Something called an origination letter. So I assure you, whether by FOIA, by hook or by crook, or by OIG, someone is going to get that origination letter. And I don't think it's going to be good. I think it's going to lead down a trail that is going to be very unproductive for the people who thought that this was appropriate for whatever reason. I don't even want to think about what led to all of this.
It's amazing, and this is why I want to keep hammering this Fed stuff, because now it seems to smell to me there's something really that's going on that stinks, that's corrupt, and I do think it needs to be exposed, and I'm worried that it won't be exposed. Whether an IG is able to get to the bottom of it, I don't know. I'm skeptical, but I do think sometimes I'm a small guy, but eventually somebody picks up the story for me, and I do have some other media people that I talk to that are bigger. Eventually, if I can convince them to go with it, maybe at some point somebody else picks it up. But just to add a little more intrigue to this, again, there's certain things I don't want to say, but there is evidence that Turtle Boy was protected by FBI agents, at least one. I don't want to get into details. And then just to add on top of that, in Turtle Boy's hearing a couple of weeks ago, you were there and you remember that Bradel said, told the judge, I've been on the phone with the FBI all morning. But that's not even the thing that I'm talking. So that's just another piece of it. So go on. What do you think about any of this stuff? You think, is it possible he's been protected by a rogue agent or a rogue program? Or
is your name Dick Layer, Kevin?
I wish.
Do you think anyone gets that reference? You want to know something funny? I read Black Mass for the first time right when it came out. It was 6th grade, so it had to be like 19, maybe a few years after it came out, because Dick Layer was a Globe columnist. I read that. Yeah, well, you want to know something wild? I knew his son, and he must have thought, now that I look back on this, he must have been utterly perplexed by this. But in 6th grade, I'll never forget this, because it was when right when The Rock and Stone Cold were pushing towards WrestleMania in April 2001, so it had to be 6th grade. I went to Dick Layer's house with his son, and I was like, I love your book. I read Black Mass every morning. I know it inside and out. I was like 10 years old, and I was like, will you sign it for me? And he did, and I'm sure I still have it somewhere. So I'm forever thankful to Dick Layer for signing that book. Anyway, I hope people get what I'm saying there, which is, God, like I mean, I'm certain people are starting to realize the implications of all of this, but just think about what, like, I don't know how. Let's use an analogy, right? So, have folks ever watched? Have you ever watched, Kevin? Like, after the fact analyses of how the government handled, like, organized crime sources in, like, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, setting aside Whitey Bulger, because I don't want to go there, but let's just talk in general how they handle CISs, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're familiar that this is a confidential intelligence or confidential human intelligence source.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, I good.
In general, they don't appreciate breaking the law, but they tend to give, much like who was the Sopranos character? I won't say his name, but he ended up with the fishes. Much like
Yeah.
that guy. Remember when he was in that car chase in the season of The Sopranos, when he
Mm-hmm.
was like, "Oh my dear God, this is a perfect analogy." So when Big Puss is trying to follow, I think, Christopher Moltisanti and a few other guys on some, like, minor truck heist. He's kind of
Mm-hmm.
surveilling them because Big Puss thinks he's become like an FBI agent. And then he causes this huge crash. Do you remember what happens as a
Yeah.
result of that? What
Yeah.
happens in
Yeah.
the hospital?
Well, I remember the FBI was very upset with him, but obviously they buried it. They tried, they protected him.
Now, this case,
And
I think the ship has sailed. That's kind of what I'm getting at. I don't think people realize the reckoning that could be coming. Like, if that grand jury, that federal grand jury, ended without charges, and the USAG comes in and says that in court, and the OIG is actually investigating, I mean, I the forget about, I mean, this case is incredibly important for the victim and the family, but this case, forget about justice in the context of the verdict. We will hear about this case for 25 years, if even
yep.
half of this is what actually happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, I have a new thing that I've scripted that I'll be coming out with soon. Some much deeper investigation and a little speculation onto some of the Fed stuff that goes on. But a CI stands for confidential informant, but there's a whole other type of CI. Now, they did use where they're not getting information from this guy so much as they're developing him like the CIA develops an asset overseas, and it's something so that they can use to lead to something.
Holy
Whether they
shit. Are
want
you
to.
saying, I'm sorry to jump in, but are you saying that this could be like those allegations that NSC 131 was actually seeded with some federal agents kind of thing? You know what I'm talking about?
What is
That's the Nazi group that shows up at, like, the straight pride rallies with, like, Nazi insignia. There are
That's
theories.
exactly, yes. Yep.
Okay, so you're saying,
It's
wow, to, like,
yeah, that's exactly.
facilitate.
And I've traced it back.
Isn't that called counter intel or contelipro? Do you
But
want to
that
Google
sounds like
that? Do you want to Google that term, contelipro?
I don't right now. I'm too busy
Oh,
trying to
so hold on.
monitor trolls and stuff like that. But
I didn't want to
just
take the opportunity for you to be told
yeah,
what this is, because
yeah,
I'm pretty sure what you're describing
yeah.
is a thing, but please go ahead.
Yeah, this is something that FBI had done in the past in the 60s and 70s, and some of it was exposed by the church committee, and they pretty much put a stop to it. But under the war on terror, it really reared its ugly head again. So what they found was the way there was obviously demand to try to stop Islamic terror, but it turned out there weren't that many Islamic terrorists, and the ones that they were pretty hard to find because they're just small groups of guys that already knew each other. So you're not going to get somebody inside that group. But the way to get promotions inside the FBI is to bust a terrorist ring. So they found an easier way: develop an asset, someone that you've developed a relationship with over time. Take that person and have them have them find a potential terrorist, someone who's a little bit radical or an idiot like Steve Cody, and you whisper into his ear. They're CI, but I'm going to use the word that I prefer in this kind of CI is an asset. So you have that asset, start developing this guy as a terrorist, and then you swoop in and you make the arrests at the right moment, and you get the headlines, and everybody gets a promotion, and everybody's happy. This became the norm. And this was covered by liberal outlets like Mother Jones and like The Intercept and several other ones, and ignored by the conservative media, okay, because they believed that there was a big problem with Islamic terrorism. And I probably would have been sympathetic to that side myself back then. However, we were wrong, because it was, once this was established, now it's been turned on a new source. And that is, you noticed over the last 6 years, the FBI says the biggest terrorism problem we have is from the far right. And that's become the main target. That's, if you want to get promotions within the FBI, develop, make a big arrest related to some kind of far right terrorism. And they use the same exact techniques. And this became turned into Operation Cold Snap, which led to the plot that the FBI conceived of, developed, planned, plotted, funded, everything for the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer in Michigan. And it was a multi-state program. The FBI will never come clean on it, but we know from the testimony in that trial that there were 7 other states at least that were involved in. All right. And certainly there were probably a lot more. And the person, the special agent in charge of the Detroit office who oversaw that was promoted. About 3 months before the January 6th uprisings, he was promoted to became special agent in charge of the Washington field office. So he was in charge, and they did all the same things. And again, I'm not someone that's defending insurrection or anything like that. I don't. What happened that day was disgraceful. But it has nothing. It's not always to do with politics. A lot of these FBI agents, a certain percentage of them, have learned that the best way to get a promotion is to develop headlines, and the easiest way to develop headlines is to take these assets and kind of create your own plots. I know it sounds crazy, but it's backed up by the evidence.
Okay, so I have a few things to say about that. One, I think it's incredibly important that people understand that the integrity of the United States and our governmental apparatus, in particular on the federal level, requires an extreme level of confidentiality, that it's almost hard to explain the level of confidentiality we're talking about here. The reason why the church committee, and by the way, CONTELAPRO is absolutely what you're describing. The reason why the church committee was such a big deal, and folks should look this up, there's a lot of good reports on it. Frank Church was the senator. Came about after Watergate. I think it was in like 75, but it really wasn't looking at Watergate. It was really looking at the weaponization of the intelligence community. Now, here's what people need to understand. Most of the talk about the intelligence community, rightfully so, is by people who have no idea what is going on. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not a member of the intelligence community. Frankly, I would be very concerned if they approached me, because I'm very aggressive and I'm nonpartisan and I like to report things and don't do a good job keeping a secret. But let me be very clear that I've read a lot of these reports. And the Gretchen Whitmer thing, you are not kidding. You're absolutely not kidding. Let me tell you something else that is publicly accessible. I think it came out of the Horowitz IG investigation. Do you know who Carter Page was?
Yep.
Do you know what a FISA warrant is?
Mm-hmm.
It's covered by Section 702.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know when you go to a FISA? Yeah. Do you know what the FISA court approval rate is for applications to its secret process that is ex parte, which means it's just the government there and you don't even get to go? Do you know what the approval rate is?
I'd say 99.9.
Like 99.1. Do you know how much of a problem it is if the government misleads the FISA court?
Mm-hmm. And they definitely did that there. Yep.
In the context of Carter Page, they withheld that Mr. Page was working for the CIA and specifically running an operation with a professor named Stephen Halper over in the UK to target Russian oligarchs. Now, what I would like to say by way of analogy here is that quite frankly, very few things in this world scare me, but it quite frankly terrifies me to think that there is even a potential that this was a disrupt, disorganize, and destroy operation. Now, let me back up a little bit by saying, if that's what this was, let's think about this. It was accomplished. And do you know how I know that? Because look how many people walked up to those victims and witnesses or victims' family members and witnesses and their supporters at the end of Friday's hearing on Tom's video. I put it up on Twitter. Just Tom.
Yeah.
So if you're rather than considering this a negative, if you're telling me this could have been a disrupt, disorganize, and destroy operation with this unwitting, person who wanted a lot of attention, Turtle Boy, like if the intent was to disrupt, destroy, and disorganize, they did it.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump too far down to where it seems like I'm saying that there was just some master plan here. I don't think it's off. I think a lot of times we like to if this is a movie, right? There's going to be one thread that eventually becomes revealed at the end that united the whole plot. And I don't think real life always works that way, and probably most often does not work that way. There's a variety of interests, and there's several threads that sometimes can intersect. That would be as far as because even
do you know how this is true though? I want to tell you, you will get your answer. Do you know what an in-camera inspection is?
I forget.
It's when the court. It's not like a very common thing. It's when the court says to both sides in open court, I'm not going to let you talk about this document. I will take it into chambers and I will review it.
Oh,
and
yes.
We'll talk about
it.
Okay. So sorry, but I didn't mean to jump in. If that happens, you are on track.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just, we don't know. The things nothing to me. And I've talked about this with a lot of other people, really fully adds up. On the one side, there's a theory of a rogue agent, and we do know the names of the agents involved, but doesn't really make sense. Some of them aren't even connected to each other. Also, it can't be centered on Aidan because Aidan wasn't involved until April of this past year. His first article was on April 18th, and he really didn't get involved until a few days before that. But apparently, the FBI was investigating this, if Karen is correct in what she was saying, in August. Aidan reported a few weeks ago. He says the federal investigation on this began in December. The DA Morrissey said he didn't know, and he said he thought maybe it began around the time of Rollins' dismissal. So that would be April or May. So there's a lot of strange things here that don't really add up, and that's why I'm wondering if there's not one through line that goes through, but there's a bunch of things that are just kind of intersecting and don't indicate a central plan or a big overwhelming conspiracy, but things that are conspiratorial and that they're underhanded.
Well, what you'd have to answer for this to make sense is, why would the feds burn Aidan right now? And then what's fascinating to me, and just as analysis, is so I was going to bed the other night and I was thinking, if I was really, really worried about like the safety of people involved in a court process, about the sanctity of it, if I really thought this was a problem, then the most vital time to insulate that process would be 90 days before the court hearing, the trial.
Yeah.
And so you have to ask yourself, if the feds really were running Aidan Kearney as a deep cover source, oh my dear God, if the feds think of this as an extremist movement, I'm talking about the Turtle Boy supporters. If the feds think of this as an extremist movement, then it makes perfect sense that they would run Kearney as a confidential informant with the purpose of infiltrating, disrupting, and destroying it. But then your question earlier, why would they burn him right now? And you gave a plausible answer to that, which is, what they're really doing is looking for the headline and the splash. So the government is very good at protecting itself. Like I've had a lot of interface with regulatory agencies, spokespeople, things like that in all sorts of contexts. And their primary concern is always self-preservation. So there's a very viable reason why they would have burned him right then if they thought the heat was getting on them.
Right. See, I don't see this. And like I said, we don't know, and there's nothing, but I don't see this as a situation where somebody sat in a room and said, let's develop a plot and we're going to recruit this guy, Aidan, to be a part of it. I don't think that. But I think that what can happen is you have bureaucrats in Washington who say we need to target right-wing media, and we're going to create this program that does it across most of the states. And now, if you're going to go out to Michigan, you're going to find militia, okay? But if you go, the way that program is going to manifest in some place like New England, there really aren't militia. It's a different kind of culture here. So what you would do is look for someone who's white, who is somewhat MAGA or conservative or something like that from their perspective, right? And I'm not criticizing those. I'm just, but someone who's right-wingish, and someone who has a blog or, a bully pulpit kind of thing, or maybe in a bullhorn, that kind of thing, and a following, something. So he could generate a crowd, a small crowd, even before the Karen Read case, it would have been a small crowd. But how many other people comparable to Aidan fit that kind of bill? So I could see somebody like that, just a bureaucrat, saying, let's just get this, we're tasked with developing assets that can be employed in a future situation when we need it. And just, all right, everybody go out and you find your assets. And so somebody just said, this guy seems to fit the bill, but not because there was some specific plan. Let's go trap create a plot to go after a governor or something. Just something. Let's get this guy in our system a little bit. That's the most that I would think. But does that make sense? Or
yeah, and then I could see that again. Just thinking about what's going to happen at this 18th hearing if the feds even do come. I could see something like that. I could also see something like the feds being like, you've gone way too far. You just violated bond and, assaulted someone allegedly. Like, you have a restraining order issued. We're done.
mm-hmm.
But then the question really becomes, what are they doing? Like, yes, I get what you're saying. Okay, infiltrate right-wing networks. Okay. And then you get this. Okay, say you do have this federal probe started by Rollins in a way that was meant to target Morrissey, and say that it's pretextual. Forget that. It's still going to go forward, right? So you ostensibly would treat it like any other investigation, and you would develop sources, and maybe people would start to feel like, hey, because we know this Fed thing's going on and we know the brass, we're not going to be able to be held accountable by the state police brass. You can't do anything to us.
Yeah.
I would hate that if I were the agencies of state government, and I would put every resource I had towards breaking up that and exposing it. And you don't want to fight the government. You will not win.
No, but what happens if it ends up being the state fighting the federal government? I mean, because we do have dual sovereignty there. So it's not like they can't.
If that's true, if indeed it were tension between the state and the feds, and we're talking about something that was already decided, because he wouldn't have been jailed on the bond violation if the feds still were running him, in my opinion. The only reason you'd go to jail on that bond violation if you were actually being run by the feds is, that it's a high level offense in the context of you cannot commit domestic violence. That's horrific, and the stuff on the tape, but he didn't murder someone. He didn't shoot someone. Right. He didn't even drunk drive or whatever. The point is, to revoke bond on that, if you're a federal informant, no, only if he didn't have protection. That's my opinion at that moment.
Right. All right. So let's get to one other interesting thing. And I know this is the time when you usually want to sign off. So I want to respect that. There's a hearing tomorrow.
Oh, right.
On Aidan. And I'm going to be careful how I say this, but no, I really can't. You know what? I can't go into. We'll have to go into this privately. I'm sorry, I can't talk about this. There's certain things I can't talk about. So yeah, let's just go into the hearing tomorrow. What do you got on that?
That's okay. Yeah, sure. So yeah, let's talk about the hearing tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen when we get to the courthouse tomorrow. I don't know if it's going to be public, private. The last restraining order hearing in the case was not public, but I believe. So let me take us through let me be very clear about what has happened in the Kearney case, because we're transitioning a little bit. So
Mhm.
Kearney was charged with 16 felonies by a superior court or by a grand jury, and then brought up on those charges in superior court. I think it was in October, November, or somewhere around there, maybe. I don't think it was December. But then Kearney eventually went to the superior court judge and got some of the conditions of his bail changed, because the case transitioned from a lower level court to the superior court. And at that hearing about bail, the judge kind of said, well, I don't really have authority to impose a no contact order because I'm a superior court judge. And so the judge lifted that order on December 23rd, right before Christmas. But the judge kept in place. Again, this is on the 16 felonies related to witness intimidation, I believe, in the Reed case. And then one of the felonies is conspiracy because of Kearney and a dispatcher, I believe, taking photo, or somebody took a photo outside of a witnesses where a witness was, and then the photo was run through a license plate database that's only accessible to dispatchers. And anyway, so there's 16 charges, and in the context of Kearney picking up those 16 charges, he gets a bond. Now, eventually that bond is changed, and you'd call it bail. The bond is changed from no contact with the victims and witnesses to just no picking up new charges, and there might have been something else in there. But the point is the no contact was removed on that Friday. That very night, I believe, maybe the next day, maybe, I think it was that week, I'm pretty sure. Within very 48 hours of, it may have actually been a Wednesday hearing, that Kearney hearing. There's been a lot of hearings. But within 48 hours of that hearing happening, and Kearney going out on the front house steps, and the turtle comes out of his shell being on the Boston Herald front page, Kearney allegedly, according to the new charges, goes over to a witness in the Karen Reed case, who had been a romantic partner with Kearney dating back to September of 2023. But according to the affidavit, in the second set of criminal charges, that relationship ended due to a personal medical issue that the victim did not want to discuss. Okay. So Kearney goes over to this house. Why? Well, apparently Kearney had been told by the victim that the victim was subpoenaed to a grand jury, a state grand jury, I think, related to Mr. Kearney, potentially Miss Reed, and that the witness was going, or the victim was going to testify. So Mr. Kearney, allegedly. Now there's some disputes here about whether the victim, I think the victim asked Mr. Kearney to come over, but Mr. Kearney, I've seen some texts had also been asking the victim if he could come over. So I think there was some back and forth in the days leading up to this. But Mr. Kearney goes over to the victim's apartment, and they meet in the conference room of the apartment building. Mr. Kearney and the victim are talking, and they eventually decide to go back to the victim's apartment itself. Now, the victim at that point is asked by Mr. Kearney to show her phone, because Mr. Kearney wants to examine messages between the victim and Kate Peters. And the victim says, this is all from the affidavit, by the way, that was read in court. The victim says to Mr. Kearney, I really don't want to show you my phone. But simultaneous to all of this going on, the victim is saying to Mr. Kearney, like, listen, I want to have an abortion by taking this pill, and I'm only going to do it if you're willing to stay with me, because the process of taking this pill involves a fetus being discharged from the body, and I don't want to do it alone. Like, I need someone who's a responsible adult. I can't just be around my kids. And we know this because a recording was played in court, which we'll get to, about this interaction. But so Mr. Kearney, while that situation is going on, very intense with the victim, Mr. Kearney is also trying to get the victim at the same time to give over this phone. And eventually she does. And Mr. Kearney begins taking notes on the messages between the victim and Miss Peters. And apparently at some point during this, Mr. Kearney gets the victim to give over the special prosecutor's cell phone number, all of which are taken down on a pad of notes. Now, there's a lot of questions about this pad of notes. You know, where did it come from? Did he show up with a pad of notes? Did she have a pad of notes? Did he pick it up and start writing on it? Anyway, so he's writing on this, he's writing notes apparently, and she eventually, because he sets them down, is able to pick them up. She picks up the note. We don't know if it's her notepad. We don't know if it's his notepad, whatever. She rips off the notes that he had taken and puts it down her shirt. At that point, according to what was said in court, Mr. Kearney and the victim are in a confrontation, and it culminates in the victim being pushed because the victim won't turn over her notes on this conversation. But amongst all of this, Mr. Kearney and the victim are still talking for another few hours because the victim is going through, as I mentioned, a very intense and personal situation, and basically saying, like, even in light of everything that we just went through over that paper, I need you. I cannot do this alone. I will get my kids, wake them up, follow you in your car to your house, and have the abortion in your driveway to make sure I'm safe if I have to. She's being very clear about it. But again, remember, their interaction doesn't end just over the notes. Eventually, from what I understand in the recording, the victim agrees to take the abortion pill, and then Mr. Kearney tries to leave. He says, like, I'm out of here or something. The victim at that point convinces him to stay, and then they have intercourse. Then Mr. Kearney leaves later that morning. Now, from there, there was a police complaint filed. Or now this is where we get to kind of the modern, the what's happened more recently. There was a police complaint filed. Then there was a restraining order request filed with the police. And then the police issued a BOLO with probable cause to arrest Mr. Kearney on, I think, Saturday. Now, Mr. Kearney initially reached out and said he would turn himself in. That didn't happen. This was confirmed, I think, by the DA of Norfolk County in an interview with the Fall River Reporter, I think. And at that point, I think it was Tuesday morning, Mr. Kearney still hadn't turned himself in. He described himself in a Facebook post as a fugitive during that time, which, just a personal opinion, that is the most crazy thing to say in a
I know.
Oh
you're
my
admitting,
dear God. You cannot say that. The judge, that can be introduced against you. The judge is going to read that and be like, that is prima facie evidence of flight. Not just flight, but intent to flee. It's you admitting you fled. It's crazy. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Getting back to the situation. Mr. Kearney, eventually an arrest warrant is issued for him that Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday morning after Christmas. So we're talking December 26th of 2023 now. An arrest warrant is issued that morning. The Dedham court docket updates about 10:20 that morning. I know because I refreshed it every 30 seconds until it showed his. I watched the court clerk entering their cases, and I was like, oh, 12 minutes to get that in. That was pretty impressive. 15 minutes for that one. And then eventually we got to Mr. Kearney's charges, which were very serious charges of domestic assault and battery, which is a special kind of assault and battery on someone that's like in your household or that you have an intimate relationship with. And then witness intimidation, which of course is 268-13B. Now, Mr. Kearney picking up those new charges, despite he didn't have a no contact order, but Mr. Kearney did violate his bond, the judge found, by picking up those new charges, which in turn resulted in Mr. Kearney being jailed. But that's not what's going to come up tomorrow. What's going to come up tomorrow is on that weekend. So we're talking the weekend of Christmas. The way a restraining order issues, and I'm getting acquainted with this process, but I think I can describe it. You go to the police, and I think the police chief can sign an emergency restraining order. Then what happens is the next available time there's a court hearing, you can have what's called an ex parte hearing. And we talked about this term ex parte earlier. It means a one-sided communication with the court. Now you have it on the record, you have it in like the courtroom. It's closed and it's just you. So on the morning that Kearney was arraigned, so Kearney was arraigned at 2:30 p.m. on December 26th, right around then. And the victim that morning apparently was in Dedham District Court at 9 a.m. for a closed-door restraining order hearing. I know this because I've seen the documents there. You can inspect them. And the documents, this is why this is very important. The closed door hearing could only result in what's called 10-day order being issued. A 10-day order being issued means that the judge, with just the victim there, can issue an order for up to 10 days restraining the other party. Now, here's where, if we want to overlap timelines here, if this is how we're thinking about this, that restraining order gets issued by the police over the weekend. The chief, I think, has to sign it. Then on Tuesday, the judge extends it for 10 days, I think, in the ex parte context, right? And Mr. Kearney's, obviously, it's ex parte because he's not at the court yet. Then during the bond revocation hearing, which is at 2:30 p.m. on that Tuesday, the 26th, the judge says to Mr. Kearney, now, Mr. Kearney, I'm revoking your bond. You're going to jail. And I want to be very clear, the restraining order is still in effect, and you are, now there was no contact, I think, maybe I got to reconfirm, but even though, setting that aside, the judge said, there is a restraining order in effect, Mr. Kearney. You are not to contact the victim from that jail. And that means directly or indirectly. I don't think the judge said that part, but I'm pretty sure what that restraining order entails is directly or indirectly. Now, what happens next in the restraining order context, finally bringing us to January 7th, January 8th, which is tomorrow. At 9 a.m., there will be a hearing to determine whether that restraining order will be extended. That can be extended by up to 1 year. There's no such thing as a permanent restraining order, I don't think, in Massachusetts. But if it's extended, what the judge will do is the judge will set another renewal date for the day that the order expires. So say the judge says, all right, I'm going to extend this for a year. Then on the 364th day, you'll go before the judge again, and that will be called a renewal hearing, and the victim will have the opportunity to extend. The judge likewise could also deny the restraining order or deny it, like to continue it. Now, restraining orders are a very specific thing. We've talked, Kevin, do you remember when we talked about how the definition of harassment in 268.13b is precising in that it changes what normally harassment is in the Massachusetts?
Yeah.
How it only requires that one instance? Well, a harassment prevention order or restraining order normally requires more than that. It normally requires documented harm or more like a pattern of behavior. And with the restraining order being extended, you're going to see a very similar analysis in court tomorrow. The judge in particular is going to look at what has happened since the order was issued. And then the judge is going to make a determination. And here's what's going to be interesting. Kearney is still jailed. So tomorrow we're going to see Mr. Kearney brought to the court in shackles from the jail and brought up into the dock, where maybe the defense table, where he will be there as a prisoner of the Massachusetts Department of Corrections while the judge determines not whether he gets out of jail. That's not even an option tomorrow. It's just whether the restraining order will continue to be in effect. And that brings us to the conclusion of what we will find tomorrow.
Do you think the either Aidan or Bradel sent two private investigators that morning that Lindsay was supposed to appear to testify, and that delayed her? One of them was arrested for witness intimidation. Will this be a factor tomorrow?
So I wagged my finger because there's a journalistic duty for alleged victims of domestic violence and sexual assault to not say or allege them to have a certain name or identity. It's just a common practice to protect victims.
I'm sorry if I said her name. I apologize.
No, that's okay. And again, this court hearing could be public tomorrow, and it's very important for people to remember that victims have no rights. Victims have no rights. So the reason why you can get in serious trouble for trying to scare them for speaking their truth is because they have no rights. So getting back to the restraining order, what was it we were talking about? Mr. Kearney.
No, I asked if it was relevant. Would that be a violation of a restraining order, sending private investigators on the morning?
So here's the thing. What we don't know a lot about right now, and I'm so glad you brought this up because it's crucially important, and I forgot it because it was a very quick detail in the Kearney new felony charges hearing. The prosecutor said that morning, I think it was, that morning, and this is a now that I think more about this with the RO having issued and things like this, that is just intense. Two private investigators approached the victim, but simultaneous to that, and I think, no, it wasn't simultaneous, actually. Simultaneous to Mr. Kearney trying to turn himself in, one of the investigators was read his rights about the contact that had happened with the victim earlier. Now, I got to make sure the timeline was it was that morning and stuff like that. And I'm not going to pass. I don't know what the judge is going to think of that. But clearly, Mr. Kearney was jailed that day. And I do not think the judge in the who is the judge, by the way, who jailed Mr. Kearney, heard the restraining order. So the judge had heard the victim that morning. So if the judge has already ruled in favor of this victim, the judge is now going to come back tomorrow, and Mr. Kearney and Mr. Bradel are going to have to explain themselves if indeed the judge feels like this private investigator, especially facing like being read his rights, was a problem. Now, here's the other thing. Mr. Bradel was quick to say, listen, I've been doing this for 30 years. I know how private investigators work. I have a duty to provide effective assistance of counsel. That was his argument in court, basically. I know how this works, Judge. But I think what the judge might say is, Mr. Bradel, that day, really? That morning? Really?
Yeah. And would that reflect possibly back on any restraining order conditions to the, or
it's
hard
really
to prove,
tough.
I guess, that would be the purpose, but
it's really tough to tell. I'm not the state, right? So I have no idea. The only contact I've ever had with anyone in the prosecutor's office was a spokesperson, and I always quote them and disclose it.
Yeah.
And it's only been like 1 or 2 times. So I have no idea what the state's going to say tomorrow. But based on the state's behavior at previous hearings, and I guess this is more the victim making the argument, but the victim is a state's witness. So, but I think the witness will go in there, the victim, very prepared tomorrow. And I would not be surprised to see the restraining order be extended, because the vibe that I got was, more so than anything else, the court was concerned with the safety and well-being of the victim, which is what a restraining order is all about. So
Okay. All right. Well, great. Thank you. That was really insightful. Thank you very much, Grant. And I think some of the other stuff that I was thinking about talking about, some really important things, but I'm not sure if I should talk about them publicly yet. So maybe I'll give you a call during the week and we'll strategize about that a little bit. And I would like to hear what you think. But these are some interesting things. But discretion sometimes is worth it. You don't want to jeopardize anything. So I'll give you a call during the week. But thank you very much for being here. You'd like to say goodnight or promote anything?
Oh, sure. No, it was great to be with you. I enjoyed the conversation, and I think the saying is retreat is the better part of valor. But I've always liked changing it to discretion is the better part of valor.
That's the way I've always heard it, is discretion is the better part of valor. But yeah.
But you can find more from me at Grant Smith Ellis. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'll be live if I can cover tomorrow's hearing. I will be live tweeting it from the Dedham District Court. And thank you very much. By the way, I also cover regulatory hearings. I cover South Lebanon and Yemen and Gaza. And you can follow me on patreon.com/Grant Smith Ellis to read all about it.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Grant. And everybody else, good night. I will see you guys all